Sometimes the greatest loss in a man's life isn't what he gave up, it's what he never stayed long enough to see. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel glowed beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered warm light across hundreds of guests dressed in tailored suits and elegant evening gowns. Conversations drifted through the air like soft music, blending with the distant notes of a string quartet positioned near the stage. At the center of it all stood Ethan Whitmore, founder and CEO of Whitmore Capital, a man whose name appeared on magazine covers, business channels, and lists ranking the most influential leaders in America. At 39, he had become the image of success. The cameras loved him. Investors trusted him. Reporters followed his every move. Tonight, he was receiving the Forbes Future Leaders Legacy Award, a recognition reserved for people whose decisions shaped industries and inspired generations. As the host introduced him, applause rolled through the room. Ethan adjusted the button of his tuxedo jacket and stepped toward the stage with the calm confidence people expected from him. The giant screens on either side of the ballroom displayed highlights from his career: office towers, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, interviews, and smiling photographs from charity events. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked controlled. Yet as Ethan reached the podium and glanced across the audience, something unusual caught his attention. In the front section reserved for distinguished guests sat a young boy, perhaps 6 years old, wearing a navy blazer and polished dress shoes. The child looked entirely unimpressed by the glamorous event around him. While adults listened attentively, the boy sat with one ankle resting over his knee, arms folded comfortably, wearing an expression of quiet confidence that seemed strangely familiar. Ethan paused for the briefest moment. It was an odd posture for a child. Not rude, not arrogant, just natural, as though he belonged exactly where he was. The audience never noticed the hesitation, but Ethan did. He found himself looking again. The boy shifted slightly in his chair and glanced toward the stage. For reasons Ethan could not explain, a strange sensation tightened in his chest. Then the child smiled at something whispered by the little girl seated beside him. Ethan's breath nearly stopped. The smile was identical to one he had seen in old family photographs his entire life. The same curve, the same dimples, the same unmistakable expression. He forced himself to continue speaking. Years of experience allowed him to maintain his composure even when his thoughts began to drift. The audience listened as he thanked mentors, employees, and supporters. His voice remained steady, but his eyes kept returning to the front row. The little girl beside the boy looked about the same age. She wore a pale blue dress and held a program booklet in her lap. Every few moments she leaned toward her brother and whispered something that made him grin. Ethan felt increasingly distracted. The resemblance was becoming impossible to ignore. Then the boy turned fully toward the stage. Under the glow of the ballroom lights, Ethan finally saw his face clearly. The room seemed to fade away. The applause, the music, the cameras, all of it disappeared beneath a wave of disbelief. It was like looking into a photograph of himself from more than 30 years ago. The same eyes, the same jawline. Even the way the child tilted his head mirrored mannerisms Ethan had never consciously noticed in himself. For a second, his carefully prepared speech nearly vanished from memory. He tightened his grip on the podium. The audience assumed he was pausing for emphasis. No one realized his world had shifted. Then he noticed someone standing behind the children. A woman. She rested one hand gently on each small shoulder. Her posture was calm, elegant, certain. The moment she stepped forward into the light, Ethan felt his pulse hammer against his ribs. 6 years vanished in an instant. The woman was Amara Brooks. The same Amara whose laughter once filled quiet evenings. The same Amara he had convinced himself was part of a past he could never revisit. She looked older now, not in a way that diminished her beauty, but in a way that revealed strength. Her eyes carried a confidence he had never seen before. She wasn't searching the room for approval. She wasn't trying to be noticed. Yet somehow she commanded more presence than anyone in the ballroom. And as Ethan stared at her, standing behind 2 children who looked impossibly familiar, one terrifying realization began to form. The past he had buried 6 years ago had not disappeared. It had grown, lived, and somehow found its way back into his life tonight. The applause that followed Ethan Whitmore's speech seemed distant, muffled beneath the noise building inside his own mind. As guests rose to their feet, smiling and clapping beneath the golden glow of the chandeliers. He forced himself to return a gracious nod. Years of public appearances had taught him how to perform confidence even when uncertainty threatened to pull him apart. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight, every instinct told him that the carefully ordered life he had spent 6 years protecting had just been interrupted by something far more powerful than reputation, success, or influence. The host returned to the stage and continued the program, but Ethan barely heard a word. His attention remained fixed on the front row. Noah sat calmly beside his sister, occasionally leaning closer to whisper something that made Nia smile. The children appeared completely comfortable among some of the most powerful people in the city. There was no nervousness in their posture, no fascination with the luxury surrounding them. They belonged there. Somehow that realization unsettled Ethan even more. He watched as Amara bent slightly and adjusted the sleeve of Noah's blazer. The gesture was simple, almost invisible to everyone else in the ballroom. Yet the familiarity of it struck him harder than any public criticism ever had. For a brief moment, he remembered another evening years ago when she had straightened his tie before an important interview. She had smiled and told him that the world would always see the businessman first, but she hoped one day someone would remember the man underneath. At the time, he had laughed. Now the memory landed like a weight in his chest. The ceremony continued for another 20 minutes before guests were invited into the adjoining reception hall. Crystal glasses reflected soft lighting, while waiters moved gracefully through the crowd, carrying trays of sparkling water and refreshments. Conversations filled the room. Investors discussed markets. Journalists chased interviews. Executives exchanged business cards. Ethan barely acknowledged any of them. His eyes searched for Amara. He spotted her near a display honoring community leaders. Noah and Nia stood beside her studying photographs mounted on illuminated panels. Ethan hesitated. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he did not know how to approach a situation. Boardrooms were easy. Negotiations were easy. Crisis management was easy. But 6 years of silence, standing 10 yards away, felt impossible. Before he could move, Noah pointed toward one of the displays. Ethan could not hear the question, but he watched Amara answer. The boy listened carefully, nodding with a seriousness beyond his years. Then something happened that made Ethan's pulse quicken again. Noah smiled and folded his arms exactly the way Ethan often did during meetings. The same posture, the same expression. Even the slight tilt of the head was identical. Ethan looked away for a second as if distance might somehow weaken what he was seeing. It did not. When he looked back, the resemblance remained. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Ethan, congratulations." He turned and found his longtime friend and attorney, Marcus Bennett, standing nearby. Marcus followed Ethan's gaze and immediately noticed the change in his expression. "Everything all right?" Marcus asked quietly. Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Finally he spoke. "Do you see that boy?" Marcus glanced across the room. "The one in the navy blazer?" Ethan nodded. Marcus studied the child briefly. Then his eyebrows lifted slightly. "That is unusual." Ethan released a slow breath. "I thought I was imagining it." Marcus looked again. "You are not." The answer offered no comfort. Across the reception hall, Amara finally turned. For the first time that evening, her eyes met Ethan's. The room seemed to pause. She did not smile. She did not look angry. If anything, her expression carried a quiet certainty that made him feel more exposed than any accusation could have. She knew exactly what he had seen. She knew exactly what questions were beginning to form in his mind. Yet she made no effort to explain. Noah tugged gently on her hand. Amara looked down at him, then at Nia. A moment later, she guided both children toward another section of the hall. Ethan took a step forward instinctively, then another. But before he could reach them, a crowd of reporters surrounded him, requesting interviews and photographs. The questions came quickly. What did the award mean to him? What were his future plans? How did he define leadership? Ethan answered automatically, his words polished by years of practice. Yet his attention remained elsewhere. Every few seconds, he searched for a glimpse of Amara or the children through the moving crowd. By the time the reporters finally stepped aside, they were gone. Ethan scanned the ballroom, the reception hall, the corridors beyond. Nothing. It was as though they had disappeared into the night. Yet the image remained burned into his memory. A little boy with his eyes. A little girl with his smile. and a woman he had spent 6 years trying to forget standing between them, like a living reminder that some choices never truly stay in the past. Ethan did not leave the hotel immediately. Long after the final guests had collected their coats and the ballroom lights had dimmed, he remained seated alone inside the back of his town car, staring through the window at the reflections of Manhattan glowing across the wet pavement. His driver waited quietly. His phone buzzed with congratulatory messages, interview requests, and invitations from people eager to celebrate another milestone in his career. He ignored them all. Every thought led back to Amara. Every question led back to those children. Around midnight, he finally returned to his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The city stretched below him in a sea of lights, but the view that once represented achievement now felt strangely empty. He loosened his tie and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. For 6 years, he had convinced himself that certain chapters of his life were closed. Forever. Yet tonight had reopened one he had spent enormous effort trying to forget. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Older, more successful, more respected, yet somehow less certain than the man he had been years ago. The memory arrived without invitation. 6 years earlier, the headquarters of Whitmore Capital had been under siege from rumors. What began as anonymous online gossip had quickly evolved into something larger. Business blogs speculated about executive misconduct. Financial commentators predicted instability. Investors demanded reassurance. Headlines multiplied faster than his public relations team could contain them. Every hour seemed to bring another article, another accusation, another threat to the reputation Ethan had spent more than a decade building. At the center of the storm stood a single reality that no one outside his inner circle knew. Amara was pregnant. Ethan remembered the afternoon she told him. Rain tapped softly against the windows of her apartment while she sat across from him, holding a small envelope in trembling hands. There had been fear in her eyes, but there had also been hope. She was not asking for promises. She was not demanding anything. She simply wanted him to know. For several seconds he had said nothing. Then slowly, despite the pressure surrounding him, he smiled. The news had surprised him. It had frightened him. Yet beneath those emotions was something else. A quiet happiness he had never expected. Amara noticed it immediately. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. For a brief moment, the future felt possible. But outside that apartment, another reality was unfolding. Within days, board members began calling emergency meetings. Investors threatened to withdraw support. Advisors warned that any personal controversy could damage ongoing negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Ethan still remembered sitting inside a conference room while senior executives outlined worst-case scenarios on glowing presentation screens. One director spoke bluntly. Another urged caution. A third insisted the company could not survive additional public scrutiny. The message remained the same. Protect the brand. Protect investor confidence. Protect the company. The pressure became relentless. Every conversation centered on risk. Every decision was measured against potential consequences. Eventually, the lines separating personal life from professional responsibility began to blur. Ethan told himself he was making a temporary sacrifice. He told himself he could fix everything later once the crisis passed. He told himself he was protecting more than his own future. The lies became easier to believe each time he repeated them. Then came the evening that changed everything. He met Amara in a quiet restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. The autumn sky had already darkened. Candles flickered softly between them. She sensed something was wrong before he spoke. Ethan could still remember the silence that settled over the table. The way her eyes searched his face. The way hope slowly disappeared from her expression as his carefully prepared words began to emerge. He spoke about timing. He spoke about circumstances. He spoke about responsibilities. He spoke about reputation. Each explanation sounded reasonable, professional, logical. Yet even as he said them, part of him understood what they truly were. Excuses. Amara listened without interruption. She never raised her voice, never argued, never pleaded. When he finally stopped speaking, she looked down at her hands for several seconds. Then she lifted her eyes and asked a question he would remember for the rest of his life. When all of this is over, Ethan, will you still recognize the person you became to save it? He had no answer then. He had no answer now. That night, she walked away with quiet dignity. No dramatic farewell. No public confrontation. Just silence. Within weeks, she was gone from his life completely. Ethan spent years convincing himself it had been necessary. Necessary for the company. Necessary for stability. Necessary for success. Standing alone inside his penthouse 6 years later, he finally allowed himself to confront a possibility he had avoided ever since. What if the most expensive decision of his life had never appeared on a balance sheet at all? While Ethan stood alone inside a penthouse filled with everything money could buy, 6 years earlier Amara Brooks had been learning how little comfort money actually provided when life changed overnight. The first winter after she left New York felt longer than any season she had ever known. She rented a small apartment in Newark, New Jersey, on a quiet street lined with aging brick buildings and bare maple trees. The apartment was barely 700 square feet, but it offered something she desperately needed. Peace. No reporters. No executives. No whispers about corporate scandals. Just silence. In those early months, silence became both her companion and her teacher. Some mornings she woke before sunrise and sat beside the window wrapped in a blanket, watching the city slowly come to life beneath gray skies. Fear often arrived before breakfast. Questions arrived before sleep. She wondered how she would manage doctor appointments, rent payments, and a future she had never expected to face alone. Yet every time uncertainty threatened to overwhelm her, she placed a hand over her growing stomach and reminded herself that fear could not be the loudest voice in the room. Hope had to be louder. As the months passed, she worked whenever she could. She tutored students online. She helped local nonprofits organize community programs. She accepted small consulting projects that allowed her to work from home. The income was modest, but each paycheck represented something important. Independence. Nobody rescued her. Nobody financed her future. Every step forward belonged to her. Then came the day that changed everything. Snow drifted outside the hospital windows while soft afternoon light filled the maternity ward. Amara had spent hours listening to nurses move through hallways and monitors hum quietly in nearby rooms. She expected to meet one baby. That was what every appointment had suggested. That was the future she had prepared for. Then a doctor entered with a surprised smile and news that left everyone momentarily speechless. There were 2 heartbeats, 2 children, 2 lives preparing to enter the world instead of one. Even years later, Amara would remember that moment clearly. Not because of fear, not because of shock, but because she realized her heart somehow expanded instantly to make room for twice the love. Noah arrived first. Nia followed shortly afterward. Tiny fingers, tiny cries, tiny faces wrapped in soft hospital blankets. Exhaustion washed over her, but so did gratitude. She looked at her son and daughter and understood something she had never fully understood before. The future was no longer something to survive. It was something to build. The first years were not easy. There were nights when both children woke at different hours. There were mornings when bills piled up faster than opportunities. There were moments when loneliness sat heavily beside her after the children had fallen asleep. Yet every challenge brought unexpected rewards. Noah developed a curious mind almost immediately. By age 3, he asked questions about everything. Why did rain fall? Why did airplanes stay in the sky? Why did people grow old? Nia balanced him perfectly. She carried warmth wherever she went. Teachers often described her as the child who noticed when others felt left out. Together, they filled every room with life. As they grew older, Amara became known throughout the community not as someone who had survived hardship, but as someone who helped others do the same. She launched weekend education programs for children. She organized literacy workshops. She partnered with local schools and community centers. The project started small, then expanded year after year. Families trusted her. Volunteers followed her vision. Donations gradually increased. What began as one classroom eventually became an entire youth development organization serving hundreds of children across the city. Through all of it, she rarely spoke about her past. She never poisoned her children against anyone. When Noah occasionally asked about his father, Amara answered with honesty but never bitterness. She told him that some people needed time to learn who they truly were. When Nia asked whether her father loved them, Amara would gently brush a curl from her daughter's forehead and say, "Love is measured by actions, sweetheart. Sometimes people spend years learning how to show it." On a spring evening shortly before the gala in Manhattan, Amara stood outside the new education center that her organization had finally opened. Children laughed on the playground nearby, while parents gathered beneath string lights hanging across the courtyard. Noah and Nia raced toward her carrying certificates they had earned at school. She knelt and hugged them both. The setting sun painted the sky gold behind them. Looking at her children, Amara felt something stronger than pride. She felt proof. Proof that life could grow beautiful even from disappointment. Proof that dignity could outlast abandonment. Proof that the future belonged not to the person who walked away, but to the person who stayed and built something meaningful from the pieces left behind. 3 days passed after the gala, and Ethan Whitmore discovered that success could not silence curiosity. Meetings continued. Markets opened and closed. Executives presented reports. Investors called with new opportunities. Yet beneath every conversation lingered the same question. Who were Noah and Nia Brooks? By Thursday morning, Ethan found himself standing inside his office long before sunrise. The city beyond the glass walls remained wrapped in darkness, while the first traces of dawn colored the horizon. A cup of untouched coffee sat beside his desk. His attention remained fixed on a single photograph displayed on his tablet. It had been taken during the gala. Hundreds of guests appeared in the frame, but Ethan saw only 3 people. Amara, Noah, Nia. He enlarged the image again. Noah's posture, Nia's smile. The similarities refused to fade. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Marcus Bennett entered carrying a folder. Unlike most people around Ethan, Marcus knew when to speak and when to remain silent. This morning he said nothing at first. He simply placed the folder on the desk. Ethan looked up. What is it? Marcus hesitated. You asked me to find information about the Brooks Family Foundation. Ethan opened the folder slowly. Inside were public records, articles, nonprofit reports, and photographs from community events. The more pages he turned, the quieter he became. The organization Amara had built was larger than he expected. Much larger. Educational programs, scholarship funds, literacy initiatives, community partnerships. Thousands of children served across multiple cities. National recognition, awards, endorsements from educators and civic leaders. Ethan leaned back in his chair. 6 years ago, he had imagined her struggling. He had imagined a difficult life shaped by obstacles and limitations. Instead, she had built something extraordinary. Marcus folded his arms. She has become one of the most respected nonprofit leaders in the region. Ethan nodded slowly. I can see that. Marcus studied him carefully. There is something else. He handed over another page. Ethan looked down. It was an article featuring Amara and 2 children during the opening of a youth learning center. Noah stood beside her holding a ribbon-cutting certificate. Nia smiled brightly while standing between volunteers. The article described them as her son and daughter. Ethan's eyes stopped on a single line. Twin children. He read it again. Then a third time. Twin children. The room suddenly felt very still. 6 years ago, he had known about one baby. Only one. Nobody had ever mentioned twins. He lowered the page slowly. Are you certain? Marcus nodded. Every record says the same thing. Ethan walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. Traffic moved below like streams of light. For several moments, neither man spoke. Then Ethan asked the question that had been growing heavier each day. Did she ever contact me? Marcus looked surprised. What do you mean? Ethan stared at the skyline. After she left. Did she ever try to reach me? Marcus remained silent longer this time. Finally, he answered. Not that I know of. Ethan nodded, though the answer offered little relief. Deep down, he already understood why. Amara had not been the kind of person who chased people once they made their choice. She had always valued dignity more than explanations. That realization hurt more than he expected. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself driving to Newark. He told no one except Marcus. The trip took less than an hour, yet it felt strangely significant. For years he had traveled across continents for business without hesitation. Today he felt nervous crossing a state line. The education center appeared exactly as the photographs had shown. A modern brick building surrounded by colorful murals and a playground filled with children. Parents gathered near the entrance while volunteers moved between classrooms carrying books and supplies. Laughter drifted through the air. Ethan parked across the street and remained inside the car. He watched quietly. A few minutes later, the front doors opened. Amara stepped outside carrying a stack of folders. She wore a simple navy blazer and comfortable shoes. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth or celebrity, yet people gravitated toward her naturally. Parents stopped to speak with her. Children waved enthusiastically. Staff members smiled when she passed. Respect followed her without effort. Then Noah and Nia appeared. Ethan's breath caught immediately. The twins raced down the front steps carrying backpacks. Noah stopped to help a younger child pick up a dropped notebook. Nia offered her water bottle to another little girl who looked tired after playing. Neither child knew they were being watched. Neither child performed for attention. They simply reflected the values they had been taught. Ethan felt something shift inside him. For years he had measured success through acquisitions, valuations, and headlines. Standing across the street, he witnessed a different kind of success entirely. The kind that could not be listed in financial reports. The kind built one day, one lesson, and one act of kindness at a time. As Amara guided Noah and Nia toward her car, Ethan remained hidden behind the windshield. He could have stepped out. He could have crossed the street. He could have demanded answers. Instead, he stayed where he was. Because for the first time since the gala, a difficult truth had begun to emerge. Before he had any right to ask questions about those children, he needed to understand the woman who had spent 6 years becoming someone far stronger than he had ever imagined. The following week, Ethan found himself returning to Newark more often than he cared to admit. He never announced his visits. He never stepped forward. Most days he parked several blocks away and observed from a distance, telling himself he was only gathering facts. Yet deep down he knew facts were no longer what he was searching for. He was searching for understanding. One bright Saturday morning, sunlight spilled across the community center courtyard while families gathered for a youth science fair organized by Amara's foundation. Rows of tables displayed student projects, homemade inventions, and colorful presentations. Children moved excitedly between exhibits while parents snapped photographs and applauded each accomplishment. Ethan stood near the back of the crowd wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, hoping to avoid recognition. His attention immediately found Noah. The boy stood proudly beside a model of a solar-powered irrigation system he had built using recycled materials. Though only 6 years old, he explained the project with remarkable confidence. Ethan watched as judges listened carefully to every word. Noah spoke clearly, patiently answering questions that many adults would have struggled to address. There was no arrogance in him, only curiosity and preparation. Ethan felt an unexpected smile form as he listened. Nearby, Nia hosted her own presentation. Rather than focusing on technology, she had created a project about community gardens and food access. She explained how neighborhoods could grow fresh vegetables together and share them with families in need. Her voice carried warmth that instantly attracted people. Children gathered around her display, while parents nodded approvingly. Watching the twins side by side felt strangely emotional. They were different in so many ways, yet both reflected qualities Ethan recognized immediately: determination, intelligence, compassion. The event continued throughout the afternoon. Volunteers distributed snacks, while local musicians performed on a small outdoor stage. Everywhere Ethan looked, he saw evidence of Amara's influence. Children treated one another with kindness. Staff members spoke with respect. Families greeted her with genuine affection rather than obligation. The organization she had built felt less like a workplace and more like an extended family. Later, while judges reviewed scores, Noah wandered toward a shaded bench carrying a notebook. Ethan remained where he was, but curiosity kept pulling his gaze toward the boy. Noah opened the notebook and began sketching. After several minutes, a younger child approached looking upset. Ethan noticed tears in the little boy's eyes. Before any adult intervened, Noah closed his notebook and listened carefully. He sat beside the child for several minutes, speaking quietly. Whatever he said seemed to help. By the time the conversation ended, the younger boy was smiling again. Noah handed him a small drawing from his notebook before returning to his project table. Ethan stared at the scene longer than necessary. 6 years ago, he would have measured success by stock performance and market expansion. Today, he found himself moved by a 6-year-old sharing a drawing with a stranger. The realization unsettled him in ways he could not fully explain. As evening approached, awards were announced. Noah earned first place in his division. Nia received a special recognition award for community leadership. The crowd erupted in applause. Amara stood off to the side rather than in the spotlight, clapping proudly as her children accepted their certificates. Ethan noticed something important then. Neither Noah nor Nia ran toward the stage searching for approval from strangers. The first person they looked for was their mother. Their faces lit up the moment they found her. That single detail stayed with Ethan. When the ceremony ended, families gradually began heading home. Ethan remained hidden among the departing crowd until he noticed Noah accidentally drop a folded paper near the stage. The boy did not realize it as he walked away with Nia and Amara. After they disappeared into the parking lot, Ethan approached and picked it up. It was a worksheet from school. At the top, students had been asked to answer a simple question. Who is your hero and why? Ethan's eyes moved slowly across the page. In careful handwriting, Noah had written, "My hero is my mom because she helps people even when she is tired. She teaches me that character matters more than what people think about you. She says doing the right thing is important even when nobody is watching." Ethan read the words twice, then a third time. The evening breeze moved softly through the empty courtyard as children laughed in the distance and volunteers packed away tables. Standing there alone beneath the fading sunlight, Ethan realized something painful. The values shaping Noah's life were the very values he himself had abandoned 6 years ago. And the woman he once convinced himself he needed to leave behind had spent those years teaching their children lessons he was only now beginning to learn. That night, Ethan sat alone in his study long after the city had fallen quiet. Noah's worksheet rested on the desk in front of him beneath the warm glow of a brass lamp. Character matters more than what people think about you. The words seemed simple, yet they carried more weight than most boardroom presentations he had heard in years. He read them again before carefully folding the paper and placing it inside a drawer. For the first time since the gala, he knew watching from a distance was no longer enough. If he wanted answers, he would have to face the woman whose silence had haunted him for 6 years. 2 days later, a light rain drifted across Newark as Ethan parked near the education center. Children hurried inside carrying backpacks while volunteers prepared classrooms for afternoon programs. Through the glass entrance, he spotted Amara reviewing documents at the reception desk. She looked focused, calm, completely unaware that he had spent the past several minutes sitting in his car gathering the courage to walk through the door. When he finally stepped inside, the familiar scent of books and fresh coffee greeted him. Laughter echoed from nearby classrooms. Educational posters lined the walls. The building felt alive in a way that corporate headquarters rarely did. A receptionist smiled politely and asked whether she could help him. Before he answered, Amara looked up. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to slow. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Ethan noticed no surprise in her expression. It was as though she had known this conversation would eventually arrive. She handed her folder to a staff member and walked toward a small conference room near the back of the building. Without saying a word, she opened the door and stepped inside. Ethan followed. The room was simple. A round table, 4 chairs, a window overlooking a playground where children ran beneath gray skies. Amara sat down calmly and folded her hands in front of her. Ethan remained standing for a moment before taking the chair across from her. The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, not hostile, just honest. Finally, Ethan spoke. "You knew I would come." Amara glanced toward the window. Eventually, her voice carried the same quiet steadiness he remembered. Ethan looked at her carefully. "Why did you never tell me?" She held his gaze. "Tell you what?" He exhaled slowly. "About the twins." For the first time, something flickered across her expression. Not anger, not satisfaction, just sadness. "You made your choice 6 years ago, Ethan." The words were calm, yet they landed heavily. He looked down briefly before speaking again. "I only knew about one child." Amara remained silent. "I am telling the truth." Another pause followed. Outside, children laughed on the playground. Inside, neither adult seemed capable of escaping the past. Amara finally spoke. "Would it have changed anything?" Ethan opened his mouth, but found no immediate answer. That alone felt like an answer. She nodded slightly. "That is what I thought." He leaned forward. "I was wrong." Her eyes softened for a moment, though not enough to erase the distance between them. Being wrong and being absent are not the same thing. Ethan felt every word. There was no accusation in her voice. No bitterness. Somehow that made it harder. If she had yelled, he could have defended himself. If she had blamed him, he could have argued. Instead, she simply described reality. And reality left little room for excuses. He looked toward the playground. They are incredible kids. A faint smile touched her face. They are. Pride illuminated her expression immediately. It was the brightest emotion he had seen from her all afternoon. Ethan noticed it and understood something important. Everything she had built over the past 6 years revolved around those children. Every sacrifice, every late night, every difficult decision. Noah and Nia were at the center of it all. "Do they know about me?" he asked quietly. Amara looked down at the table before answering. "They know there is a father." Ethan swallowed. "Do they hate me?" She shook her head immediately. "No." The answer surprised him. "Why not?" Amara's eyes met his again. "Because I refuse to teach them hatred." The room fell silent once more. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. She had protected his image in the minds of children who had every reason to resent him. Not because he deserved it, but because she believed bitterness should not become part of their inheritance. Outside the window, Noah suddenly appeared on the playground with a group of students. Nia followed close behind. Neither child noticed the two adults watching from inside. Ethan stared at them, unable to look away. Then Noah laughed at something another child said. The sound drifted faintly through the glass. For reasons he could not explain, that single laugh hurt more than all 6 years of silence. Because for the first time, he understood exactly what he had missed. After leaving the education center, Ethan drove back to Manhattan beneath a sky painted with the fading colors of evening. But the city that once energized him now felt strangely distant. The conversation with Amara replayed in his mind with relentless clarity. She had not yelled. She had not demanded anything. She had simply told the truth. Somehow that truth followed him into every room he entered over the next several days. During board meetings, he found himself staring at presentation screens while remembering Noah's laugh. During investor calls, he caught himself wondering whether Nia had enjoyed her day at school. For years, he had built a life around quarterly goals and long-term strategies. Now 2 children had disrupted a system that once seemed impossible to shake. The following Friday, Ethan attended a leadership summit in Newark. The event brought together educators, nonprofit directors, and business leaders to discuss youth development programs. Normally, he would have sent a representative. This time he accepted the invitation personally. The conference center buzzed with activity as speakers prepared presentations and guests filled rows of seats. Ethan arrived early and took a place near the back. Several minutes later, Amara stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple cream-colored blazer and carried no notes. The room quieted almost immediately. Ethan watched as she thanked the audience and began speaking about opportunity, mentorship, and the importance of investing in children before problems appeared rather than waiting to solve them afterward. Her words were thoughtful, but it was her sincerity that captured attention. She did not speak like someone chasing recognition. She spoke like someone who genuinely believed every child deserved a chance. Audience members leaned forward. Some took notes. Others simply listened. Ethan found himself doing the same. Then Amara shared a story about a student who had struggled academically before discovering a passion for engineering through one of the Foundation's programs. She described how confidence often grows when children feel seen. The sentence struck Ethan unexpectedly. Confidence grows when children feel seen. He lowered his eyes briefly. For 6 years, Noah and Nia had grown without ever being seen by their father. The thought stayed with him for the remainder of the presentation. Afterward, attendees gathered in the lobby for networking sessions. Ethan remained near a display of educational initiatives while guests congratulated Amara on her speech. She moved through the crowd with grace, thanking volunteers and answering questions. There was no sign of ego, no attempt to dominate attention. She simply made people feel heard. Watching her, Ethan understood another uncomfortable truth. The woman standing before him was not the same woman he had left behind. She had become stronger, wiser, and more confident than he ever imagined. The realization carried equal parts admiration and regret. As the afternoon progressed, Ethan prepared to leave when a familiar voice stopped him. "Mr. Whitmore?" He turned. Noah stood a few feet away holding a small notebook beneath one arm. Ethan's pulse immediately quickened. For a second, neither knew what to say. Noah broke the silence first. "I remember you from the gala." Ethan smiled cautiously. "I remember you too." Noah nodded. "My mom says you are very successful." The statement sounded innocent, Yet Ethan felt strangely uncomfortable hearing it. Success suddenly seemed difficult to define. "Your mother is very kind," he replied. Noah smiled proudly. "She helps a lot of people." Ethan glanced toward the lobby entrance where volunteers continued packing materials from the event. "She does." Noah shifted the notebook in his hands. "I liked your speech at the gala." Ethan laughed softly. "You listened to that?" Noah shrugged. "Some of it." The answer sounded so honest that Ethan could not help smiling. For several moments they stood together discussing science projects, favorite books, and school activities. The conversation felt natural. Easy. Ethan noticed flashes of himself in the boy's curiosity, yet far more of Amara in his kindness. Then Noah looked toward the entrance and spotted his mother speaking with a group of guests. "I should go help her," he said. Ethan nodded. "That sounds like a good idea." Noah took several steps away before turning back. "Maybe I will see you again." Ethan watched him carefully. "I would like that." The boy smiled and disappeared into the crowd. Ethan remained where he was long after Noah left. It had only been a brief conversation, perhaps 5 minutes at most. Yet when he finally walked toward the exit, he carried a feeling he had not experienced in years. Hope. Small, fragile, uncertain, but real enough to follow him all the way home. Over the next several weeks, a quiet rhythm began to form. Ethan never pushed for more than Amara was willing to allow, and Amara never offered more than she believed he had earned. Yet small changes appeared nonetheless. Sometimes he attended public events hosted by the foundation. Sometimes he exchanged brief conversations with Noah and Nia after community programs ended. Nothing about the arrangement resembled a reunion. It resembled observation. Careful, cautious observation. One crisp Saturday morning in October, the foundation hosted a citywide youth innovation showcase. Students from schools across Newark gathered inside a large civic center to present science projects, engineering ideas, and creative solutions for community challenges. Noah had spent weeks preparing a presentation involving sustainable water filtration systems designed for neighborhood gardens. Nia volunteered as one of the event ambassadors, helping younger participants find their assigned tables and encouraging nervous students before presentations began. The Civic Center buzzed with energy from the moment the doors opened. Parents carried coffee cups through crowded hallways. Teachers adjusted display boards. Volunteers distributed name tags. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows of projects stretching across the exhibition floor. Ethan arrived early and quietly took a place near the back of the audience section. He watched Noah explain his project to judges with confidence and patience far beyond his years. Every answer reflected preparation. Every explanation reflected curiosity. Ethan felt a familiar sense of pride growing stronger than he expected. Nearby, Nia moved through the room, helping younger children who seemed overwhelmed by the crowd. She offered encouragement, fixed crooked display cards, and reminded nervous participants to smile. More than once Ethan noticed adults thanking her for her kindness. As the afternoon progressed, attendance grew. Hundreds of visitors filled the exhibition hall. During a scheduled break between judging sessions, students gathered in a central activity area where educational demonstrations were taking place. Noah joined a group surrounding a robotics exhibit. Excited conversations filled the room as instructors explained how different machines worked. Ethan remained several yards away, watching casually. Then a sudden technical malfunction interrupted one of the demonstrations. Nothing dangerous occurred, but a loud mechanical noise startled several children nearby. The unexpected sound caused confusion throughout the crowded area. Students stepped back quickly while volunteers rushed to reorganize the group. In the middle of the commotion, Noah became separated from his class section and briefly lost sight of both his teacher and his mother. The crowd shifted rapidly around him. For the first time all day, uncertainty appeared on his face. Ethan noticed immediately. Without hesitation, he crossed the floor toward the boy. "Hey, Noah." The familiar voice cut through the noise. Noah turned and visibly relaxed. "Mr. Whitmore." Ethan smiled calmly. "Looks like things got a little crowded." Noah nodded while glancing around the room. "I cannot find my group." Ethan crouched slightly, so they stood at eye level. "Then let us solve one problem at a time." His voice remained steady and reassuring. Together, they moved toward a quieter section of the exhibition hall, where volunteers were helping reconnect students with teachers and parents. Within minutes, event staff located Noah's instructor and notified Amara. The entire situation lasted less than 10 minutes. Yet something important changed during those moments. While they waited, Noah asked questions about engineering companies, office buildings, and how large projects were planned. Ethan answered each one carefully. Their conversation flowed naturally. There was no awkwardness, no pressure, just genuine curiosity from a child and genuine attention from a man who was slowly learning how much those moments mattered. A few minutes later, Amara appeared. Relief softened her expression when she spotted Noah. She thanked the staff before turning toward Ethan. For a brief second, their eyes met. No dramatic words passed between them. None were necessary. She understood what had happened. Ethan had simply been there when Noah needed someone familiar. Noah looked up at his mother. "Mr. Whitmore helped me." Amara glanced toward Ethan again. "Thank you." The words were simple, yet they carried more meaning than either acknowledged aloud. Later that evening, awards were presented beneath bright stage lights. Noah received recognition for innovation and environmental design. As applause filled the auditorium, Ethan watched the boy walk confidently across the stage. The crowd saw a talented young student accepting an award. Ethan saw something different. He saw 6 years he could never recover. 6 years of birthdays. 6 years of school projects. 6 years of ordinary moments that now felt priceless. Yet as Noah smiled from the stage and searched the audience for his mother, Ethan noticed something else. For the first time, the boy's eyes briefly found him too. And when they did, Noah smiled. The smile Noah gave him that evening stayed with Ethan long after the auditorium emptied. It followed him through the drive back to Manhattan and lingered in the quiet corners of his penthouse long after midnight. For weeks he had focused on what he had lost. Now, for the first time, he found himself thinking about something else. Why had everything happened the way it did? The question refused to leave him alone. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Whitmore Capital before sunrise. The building was silent except for the hum of climate systems and the distant glow of security monitors. He carried a cardboard archive box from storage into his private office and placed it on the conference table. Dust clung to the edges. The label read Crisis Management Files. 6 years earlier, those files had consumed his life. Today, they felt like evidence from a case he had never fully investigated. Hour after hour, Ethan reviewed old emails, reports, legal memorandums, and media briefings. Most of the documents contained information he already remembered. Investor concerns, public relations strategies, market forecasts. Yet something felt wrong. Details that once seemed logical now appeared strangely coordinated. Certain rumors had surfaced too quickly. Certain media outlets had received information before official announcements. Certain executives had pushed specific narratives with unusual urgency. By late afternoon, Ethan called Marcus Bennett into his office. Marcus studied the stacks of paperwork covering the table. "You have been at this all day?" Ethan nodded. "Something does not add up." Marcus pulled up a chair. Together they began reviewing timelines. One document led to another. One email referenced a private communication neither man remembered seeing before. Then, Marcus stopped. "Wait." Ethan looked up. Marcus pointed to a chain of archived messages exchanged among senior board members. Buried inside was a reference to an external consultant hired during the crisis. The name immediately caught Ethan's attention. Victoria Sinclair. The room fell silent. Victoria had been his fiancée at the time. Elegant, intelligent, well-connected. During the corporate crisis, she had publicly supported him at every event. She had encouraged him to remain focused on protecting the company. She had repeatedly warned him that personal complications could destroy everything he had worked for. Ethan remembered those conversations clearly. At the time, her advice had seemed practical, necessary even. Marcus opened additional files. More references appeared. Consulting invoices, strategic recommendations, internal communications. None of them proved wrongdoing, but together they revealed something unexpected. Victoria had maintained direct contact with several media consultants responsible for tracking rumors surrounding Whitmore Capital. Ethan leaned back slowly. "I never knew any of this." Marcus continued reading. Several minutes later, he froze. "You need to see this." Ethan walked around the table. Marcus pointed toward an email recovered from archived records. The message had been forwarded multiple times during the crisis. It referenced anonymous information originally supplied to a blogger who later published the first damaging rumors. Ethan stared at the screen. The source listed beneath the communication belonged to a consulting firm connected directly to Victoria. For several seconds he could not speak. 6 years of assumptions began shifting beneath him. He had always believed outside forces created the crisis. He had always believed circumstances pushed him into impossible choices. Yet now another possibility emerged. Someone close to him may have helped create the very pressure that separated him from Amara. Marcus broke the silence carefully. This does not prove intent. Ethan nodded. No, but his voice sounded distant. It proves involvement. The following week, Marcus continued investigating. More information surfaced. Former consultants agreed to interviews. Archived communications were recovered. Piece by piece, a disturbing picture emerged. Victoria had not merely responded to the crisis. She had influenced it. Through strategic leaks and carefully timed information sharing, she had amplified rumors that should have disappeared quickly. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just enough pressure to create fear, just enough uncertainty to force difficult decisions. Ethan sat alone one evening reviewing the final report. Rain streaked across the windows while city lights blurred beyond the glass. The truth felt heavier than he expected. For years he had blamed market conditions, investors, timing, public perception. Now he understood that someone he trusted had quietly manipulated events behind the scenes. Yet the most painful realization arrived last. Even if Victoria had intensified the crisis, she had not made the choice. He had. Nobody forced him to walk away from Amara. Nobody forced him to choose reputation over family. The pressure may have been engineered, but the decision had still belonged to him. Ethan closed the report and stared into the darkness beyond the window. Across the river, somewhere beyond the glow of Manhattan, Amara was probably helping Noah and Nia finish homework or preparing dinner or reading bedtime stories. She had spent 6 years building a life from the consequences of a choice he made. And now, for the first time, he finally understood that the truth was far more complicated than he ever imagined. The truth changed something inside Ethan, but not in the way he expected. Discovering Victoria's role in amplifying the crisis did not bring relief. It removed excuses. For years he had told himself that circumstances cornered him. That pressure left him with no alternatives. Now those explanations felt hollow. The reality was simpler and far more painful. He had been afraid. Afraid of losing investors. Afraid of damaging the company. Afraid of watching the empire he spent years building collapse beneath public scrutiny. In protecting everything he valued, he had abandoned the people who should have mattered most. Several days later, Ethan requested a meeting with the Whitmore Capital Board. The announcement surprised executives throughout the company. Emergency meetings were rare, especially when no acquisition, merger, or financial crisis appeared on the horizon. By noon, board members filled the executive conference room overlooking Manhattan. The atmosphere carried quiet curiosity. Ethan stood at the head of the long table while city sunlight reflected across polished glass surfaces. For a moment, he simply looked around the room. Some faces had been there 6 years earlier. Others were newer. Yet all of them represented the same world that had once consumed his attention completely. He took a breath. Today is not about quarterly earnings. The statement immediately captured everyone's attention. Several board members exchanged glances. Ethan continued. 6 years ago, during one of the most difficult periods in this company's history, decisions were made based on fear. Some of those decisions protected Whitmore Capital. Some did not. The room grew noticeably quieter. Ethan spoke openly about the pressure that had defined that period. He described the rumors, the panic, and the mistakes. He did not mention every personal detail, but he accepted responsibility for choices that had been hidden behind carefully crafted public narratives. Several executives appeared uncomfortable. Others seemed surprised. Yet Ethan continued anyway. For the first time in years, he was not managing perception. He was telling the truth. When the meeting ended, reactions varied. Some board members supported his honesty. Others worried about potential consequences. Financial analysts would undoubtedly ask questions if details became public. Investors might react unpredictably. Yet for once, Ethan found himself less concerned about reputation than he was about integrity. Later that evening, he drove to Newark. Autumn leaves drifted across sidewalks as the sun disappeared behind rows of buildings. The education center remained open, illuminated by warm lights visible through large front windows. Children attended after-school programs while volunteers supervised activities. Ethan found Amara in a classroom helping students prepare presentations for an upcoming community showcase. She looked up when he entered. The children soon left for another activity, leaving the two of them alone. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan placed a folder on the table between them. Amara glanced at it, but made no effort to open it. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan remained standing. "The truth." Her eyes narrowed slightly. He explained everything. The investigation. The archived communications. Victoria's involvement. The manipulation behind the scenes. He spoke calmly and without dramatics. When he finished, silence filled the room. Amara finally opened the folder and reviewed several documents. Minutes passed. The only sounds came from distant laughter echoing through the building. Eventually, she closed the folder and looked up. Her expression revealed neither satisfaction nor surprise. "I always suspected something was wrong," she said quietly. Ethan blinked. "You did?" She nodded. "Some things never made sense." He lowered himself into a chair. "Why did you never tell me?" A faint smile touched her lips, though sadness lived behind it. "Would you have believed me?" Ethan thought about the man he had been 6 years earlier. Ambitious, defensive, obsessed with protecting appearances. The answer came easily. Probably not. Amara looked toward the classroom window where evening darkness had settled outside. "That is why I stayed silent." Ethan studied her carefully. "You could have exposed everything." She shrugged gently. "And then what?" He had no answer. She continued. "I was carrying children. I needed peace more than revenge." The word struck him deeply. Peace more than revenge. It explained so much about the life she had built. While others might have spent years fighting old battles, Amara had invested her energy elsewhere. Into Noah, into Nia, into community programs, into creating something meaningful. Ethan felt admiration rise alongside regret. "You protected me." The statement escaped before he could stop it. Amara shook her head softly. "No." He looked confused. She met his eyes. "I protected myself. I protected my children. Protecting you was simply a consequence." The distinction mattered. Ethan understood that immediately. Once again, she refused to make herself the supporting character in someone else's story. Everything she did came from strength, not sacrifice. Outside the classroom, footsteps approached. Moments later, Noah and Nia appeared in the doorway carrying backpacks and notebooks. Their faces brightened when they saw their mother. Then Noah noticed Ethan. "Mr. Whitmore." Ethan smiled. "Hey, Noah." Nia waved enthusiastically. The simple interaction lasted only seconds, yet Ethan felt something shift once more. For the first time, he was no longer looking at the twins from a distance. He was standing in the same room. Part of their world, however small that part remained. And for the first time since discovering the truth, the future no longer felt defined entirely by regret. It felt defined by what he chose to do next. Winter arrived gradually, covering Newark in cold mornings and early sunsets. The weeks following Ethan's conversation with Amara passed with a cautious sense of progress. Nothing happened quickly. There were no dramatic declarations and no sudden resolutions. Trust, Ethan was learning, moved far more slowly than ambition ever had. Yet small moments began accumulating. Sometimes he attended community events hosted by the foundation. Sometimes he helped sponsor educational initiatives without attaching his name to them. Sometimes he simply listened. And for the first time in years, listening taught him more than speaking ever had. One Saturday evening, the foundation hosted its annual Youth Achievement Exhibition inside a renovated cultural center downtown. The event celebrated students whose projects, artwork, and community service efforts had made a positive impact throughout the year. Families filled the building. Strings of warm lights illuminated hallways lined with paintings, inventions, essays, and photographs created by children from across the city. Laughter echoed through the rooms while volunteers guided visitors between exhibits. Noah and Nia had both contributed projects to the exhibition. Noah's display focused on environmental engineering concepts designed for urban neighborhoods. Nia created a visual presentation highlighting community gardens and local volunteer efforts. Ethan arrived early, quietly making his way through the crowd. As he entered the main gallery, he spotted Amara speaking with donors near one of the displays. She noticed him and offered a small nod. Nothing more. Yet, even that simple gesture carried a level of acceptance that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Throughout the evening, Ethan observed visitors stopping to admire Noah's work. Teachers praised his creativity. Engineers asked thoughtful questions. Nearby, Nia enthusiastically explained her project to anyone willing to listen. Her excitement proved impossible to resist. People left her display smiling. Watching the twins interact with others filled Ethan with a complicated mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride for who they had become, sorrow for everything he had missed. As the evening progressed, an announcement invited guests into the auditorium for the recognition ceremony. Hundreds of attendees found seats beneath soft stage lighting. Parents held cameras. Children whispered excitedly. Volunteers distributed programs. Ethan took a seat several rows behind Amara and the twins. The ceremony began with music performed by local students before awards were presented. One by one, children crossed the stage to receive recognition for academic achievement, leadership, creativity, and service. Applause filled the room repeatedly. Then Noah's name was called. The audience responded warmly as he walked onto the stage to accept a special award recognizing innovation and community impact. Ethan watched carefully. Noah accepted the plaque with confidence before stepping toward the microphone. The auditorium quieted. At first, Noah simply thanked his teachers and mentors. Then he paused. His eyes moved across the audience until they settled on Amara. A smile appeared immediately. "I learned something important this year," he said. His young voice carried clearly throughout the room. "People think heroes are always famous or powerful. But I think heroes are the people who keep showing up when nobody is watching." The audience listened attentively. Noah continued, "My mom taught me that. She helps people every day, even when she is tired. She teaches me that character matters more than reputation. She says kindness lasts longer than success." Ethan felt his chest tighten. The same words, the same lesson. Yet hearing them spoken aloud before hundreds of people somehow made them even more powerful. Noah glanced toward his mother again. "Everything good I know started with her." The auditorium erupted into applause. Amara lowered her eyes briefly, clearly touched by the unexpected tribute. Nia immediately wrapped an arm around her mother's shoulder. Ethan remained seated, unable to speak. Around him, strangers celebrated a child's heartfelt speech. Only he understood how deeply those words reached. Because 6 years earlier, he had chosen reputation over character. And now a 6-year-old boy was teaching him the lesson he should have learned long ago. After the ceremony ended, families gathered in the reception hall. Noah and Nia were quickly surrounded by friends, teachers, and volunteers offering congratulations. Ethan stayed near the back, allowing them their moment. Eventually Noah spotted him and waved enthusiastically. Ethan waved back. A few minutes later, both twins approached. "Did you hear my speech?" Noah asked. Ethan smiled. "Every word." Nia grinned. "He practiced it for days." Noah looked embarrassed. Ethan laughed softly. It was worth the practice. The boy seemed pleased by the answer. Then Amara joined them. For a moment, the four stood together beneath the warm glow of the reception hall lights, while conversations swirled around them. Nothing about the scene appeared extraordinary to anyone passing by. Yet to Ethan, it felt significant. 6 months earlier, he had not even known these children existed. Now he was standing beside them, sharing a quiet moment that felt more valuable than any award he had ever received. And as he looked at Noah, Nia, and Amara together, he realized something remarkable. The future was no longer asking him to undo the past. It was asking him to earn a place within what came next. Spring arrived 6 months later, bringing warmer air, longer afternoons, and the quiet sense that life had continued. Moving forward whether people were ready for it or not. The trees lining the streets of Newark carried fresh green leaves. Community gardens were beginning to bloom again, and the Brooks Family Foundation prepared for its largest fundraising event in history. What had started years earlier as a small educational initiative had grown into a regional organization serving thousands of children. The annual gala would celebrate that growth while raising support for future programs. On the morning of the event, Ethan stood inside his office overlooking Manhattan and studied a document resting on his desk. It was not a business proposal. It was not a merger agreement. It was not a financial report. It was his resignation as chief executive officer of Whitmore Capital. Several months earlier, such a decision would have seemed impossible. Yet now the choice felt clear. Whitmore Capital was stable. Strong leadership existed throughout the company. The organization no longer depended on one man carrying every responsibility. For years, Ethan had told himself he was protecting the future by sacrificing the present. Now he finally understood that no career achievement could replace the moments he had missed. That afternoon, he delivered the announcement to the board. Some members expressed surprise. Others attempted to change his mind. Several reminded him of the opportunities still ahead. Ethan listened respectfully before thanking them for everything they had built together. Then he walked away with a sense of peace he had not felt in years. That evening, hundreds of guests filled the grand ballroom, hosting the foundation gala. Warm lights reflected across elegant decorations while students showcased projects supported by scholarships and educational programs. Families, teachers, community leaders, and donors gathered to celebrate the organization's achievements. Unlike the gala where this story had quietly begun, Ethan arrived without concern for cameras or public perception. For the first time in a long time, he was not attending as a corporate icon. He was simply a guest. Across the room, Noah and Nia moved excitedly between exhibits, proudly explaining student projects. To visitors, their confidence had grown noticeably over the past year. They laughed easily. They belonged completely within the world Amara had created. Ethan watched them with gratitude. Not because everything had been repaired. Some things could never be repaired completely. But because they had given him something he never expected to receive. A chance. As the evening progressed, Amara stepped onto the stage to deliver the keynote address. Applause filled the ballroom. Ethan joined everyone else in standing. She spoke about education, opportunity, and the power of investing in young people. She thanked volunteers, staff members, and families. Then she paused. Her eyes moved across the audience before settling briefly on Noah and Nia. A smile appeared. "The greatest lesson I have learned," she said softly, "is that life does not always give us the story we expected. Sometimes it gives us a better one. Not because it is easier, but because it teaches us who we truly are." The room grew quiet. Ethan felt every word. When the speech ended, guests rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Later, after dinner and presentations had concluded, attendees gathered beneath string lights in an outdoor courtyard overlooking the city skyline. Music drifted through the evening air. Children played near garden pathways while adults exchanged stories and laughter. Ethan stood near the edge of the courtyard when Noah approached carrying 2 cups of lemonade. Without saying anything, the boy handed one to him. Ethan accepted it with a smile. "Thanks." Noah shrugged casually. "You looked thirsty." The simplicity of the gesture touched him more than the child realized. Moments later, Nia joined them, slipping her hand into her mother's. Amara walked over as well. For a while, the 4 of them stood together watching the lights of the city shimmer in the distance. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. It was the comfortable silence of people learning how to share the same space honestly. Then Noah looked up at Ethan. "Are you coming to the science fair next month?" Ethan smiled. "Would you like me to?" Noah grinned immediately. "Yes." Ethan nodded. "Then I will be there." The answer seemed to satisfy the boy completely. Nia smiled too. Nearby, music continued softly beneath the spring sky. Ethan glanced toward Amara. She met his eyes for a moment. No grand declaration passed between them. No dramatic promise. Just understanding. 6 years earlier, he had walked away because he feared losing everything. Standing there now, he finally understood what everything actually was. It was not the company, not the headlines, not the reputation. It was the people beside him. The woman who chose peace instead of revenge. The son who taught him the value of character. The daughter who reminded him that kindness could change a room. As the evening drew to a close, Noah reached for Ethan's hand while Nia held on to Amara's. Together they walked beneath the glow of courtyard lights, not as a perfect family and not as a finished story, but as 4 people moving toward the future one honest step at a time. And for the first time in many years, Ethan did not feel the need to look back.